I'll make it. I may really make it. Except when the guy came to check, the SS person. And that's when I held my breath. And that was, one more minute and I would have to breathe, but I was fine. He passed by. He first checked if the corpse is really dead, and it was really dead. So. For years, I had wanted to write about myself, but I'm a speaker mostly, and I've been speaking everywhere. In fact, just before this program, I just got another phone call to speak next week, which I said I can't. But and then I met Malcolm, and he inspired me to cooperate in writing, because when you write, it's a different type of experience than when you speak, not only emotionally, but also in the content. When you're quiet and you think about your life, it's different than when you speak in front of 300 or 400 people. You just say things that you know well, but when you write, you think, and more things come out that do not come out when you talk. So when Malcolm was, kind enough to do it, I thought we could try.
And what about for you, Malcolm? Because you were, as I kind of mentioned, you were an award-winning broadcaster. What was the kind of motivation for you with this whole, releasing this book?
Well, what happened was that Tova and I were having a conversation when we were doing something else together in New York, and she said she wanted to write the book, and I had been talking to a publisher about another book actually, and I said, well, listen, why don't we give it a go together? And because I know that her story is the most extraordinary human story I've ever come across, actually, I have to say, and luckily I've got to help tell it at the end of, a long career of all the, the fascinating people I've met. I mean, Tova is really up there. When I met her in Krakow in southern Poland on the 75th anniversary, I kind of fell in love with her a little bit, because in journalism, you get to meet presidents and celebrities and prime ministers. But for me, the most important thing is meeting ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. And when I met Tova, I realized that I was in the presence of a historical figure. And those historical figures are not always going to be with us. And so it was an honor that she actually allowed me to sort of help coincide, help collaborate on her story.
I never thought of myself as a historical figure, a hysterical figure, maybe.
But you are.
Not a historical.
No, just when I got things wrong sometimes, Tova. But no, you are a historical figure, and you are one of the few remaining people, who can talk about these things. And the thing is, as your son Shani says, you are a lady of a certain age who's got the most energy of that age group that he's ever come across. And you're doing an extraordinary job in sort of trying to, keep the Holocaust alive. And I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do together in this book is to make it sort of immersive, and to actually not just tell the story of what Tova went through, but to show it. And that's the kind of legacy of television journalism, in a way, is that you show rather than you tell. And I think that, when you read the book, you'll sort of feel, hopefully, that you're in the shoes of Tova and her family, and terrible shoes they were.
It's difficult for me to actually imagine that this is not a fictional book, because some of it is just completely unbelievable. But at the start of the book, you say that I think one of the motivations was that, there was a survey done. A lot of people, they don't really know much about this. So Tova, for you, it seems like a motivation, if I'm right, was kind of raising awareness, raising the education that this did happen, and it only happened 80 years ago. Is that correct?
I was interviewed by a lovely guy in New Jersey, but he writes for London Times. He was very good, and he told me, which shocked me because he's in his 40s and very intelligent, married man with a family, responsible, works here for the London Times, and he said there were things he did not know. And that shocked me because if he doesn't know, what about the 20-year-olds who aren't as educated and as in the news? He knows the news. He writes the news. So when he didn't know, I said to myself, wow, maybe I'm glad I did it because he learned new things and I wouldn't expect him to. So I'm very happy that I will be able to reach people who never had an inkling of any of this.
One of the things that I think makes this book different in a way, actually, is that it's not just about Auschwitz. And what it does do is it tells the whole tale of how the Jews in Tova's town were just persecuted all the way through the Holocaust, and that it began virtually in 1940. People seem to think, if they haven't paid enough attention, that it just happened when people were shipped off to the death camps. But the way in which Tova's family and friends and her people were persecuted all the way through and stripped of absolutely everything by the Germans is just appalling. And I think that that was one of the things that sort of I came to find sort of surprising in a way, just the level of cruelty and disgraceful behavior that went on in the ghettos, not besides everything that went on in the death camps.
See, right, I agree with Malcolm because a lot of people don't know how something started. I didn't wake up one day in Auschwitz. It was a culmination. It was like I've been through one terrible experience from one to the other from the age of 1, 2, 3. It's slowly, what happens is it's like I always think of it as a triangle. It was terrible things were happening all over Europe to Jews. Nobody was listening. Even the Jews couldn't believe it. I asked my father, why didn't you leave? Maybe to Israel or England or something. He said, no, I thought this crazy man, Hitler, somebody's going to stop him. Who's going to listen to a guy like that? So in a sense, things were happening. And then the screws got tighter and tighter. And Auschwitz was the final solution. It was the end of all of those experiences, not the beginning of the experiences. There were Kristallnacht, there were pogroms, there were a lot of things that somewhere in during that period could have been stopped. Kristallnacht, had somebody objected to this terrible thing, it may have been the end of it, but nobody did. So Auschwitz was really the final solution. There was no place to go after that. Your life was you were done. That's why it's good that there was written about like the ghettos. How many people know what happened in the ghettos?
So, as we say, people have heard of the Warsaw Ghetto, but there were scores of these places in every town in occupied Germany where there were Jews. And so, what happened to the people in the Warsaw Ghetto happened on just a smaller scale, but no less brutal in all the other places. And that's what I think, may enlighten some people in that, ordinary little Polish towns that you pass through these days, were places of terrible, terrible human rights abuses and murder and mass murder.
Right. And that was, I think, perhaps one of the biggest learning experiences for me in the book. So I wonder if we could kind of go back there, Tova, kind of what are your earliest memories from these ghettos?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
I've got a very strong Welsh accent, it's my fault.
No, it's okay. I can understand Malcolm, I can understand.
Well, we can't understand the Welsh, actually. So.
So I wonder if we could kind of go back to what your earliest memories were of these ghettos.
Well, they started at the age of 2, 2.5, where I saw shootings. In fact, shooting was as normal to me as children falling nowadays or playing in a kindergarten. The ghetto, my memory of the ghetto was the loss of whatever family I had, because they were all gone very, very quickly. And the people around me disappeared very quickly. In Tomaszow Mazowiecki, the concentration of choice, I have to say, was Treblinka. And we knew when 8,000 people were going to Treblinka. I knew the words and I knew people weren't coming back, although I couldn't imagine it. And then I remember dealing with the clothing of those people. You see, it was a real fabulously organized machine. I have to say that. In order to have the Holocaust functioning the way Hitler wanted, you had to be a genius. You couldn't, simple people couldn't do it. That's why it's so painful to me. It's not the simple person, it is the educated person. So they didn't want to waste anything. So when you went on a train to your death, all your clothing was taken away from you, even the shoes. You didn't go in naked, but you almost were naked. So you arrived because they knew you'd be dead anyhow. So then they took all that clothes and they cleaned it and washed it and sent it to Germany, because some of it was pretty good stuff that we had. Our family were tailors. Most of the town was made up of a lot of tailors. In fact, that was a Jewish profession in Poland, Jewish profession of choice, because we couldn't own property or anything. So tailoring was perfect, right? Unless you were a scholar, but you were a tailor or a scholar. So the clothing was pretty good because the tailors made the clothes for their families. And all that was taken and organized. And that's, I remember, looking at it and taking care of it together with my mother and other women. It was like a women's job. So there's a lot of memories of that period.
Did your parents explain to you at the time kind of what was going on?
My mother did. But you know what? Explanations are only words. You can't, your brain isn't always developed to understand it all. But I knew that if I don't, see, that's what she knew. And that's the way I raised my children. And I think my kids are doing it with their children. You don't lie to kids. You don't cover anything up. You don't sweeten something that's very sour. They have to know it. They have to understand it. And my mother told me, I could see, I knew that the clothes that we were organizing into piles, like separating the children from the adults, from men and women, were from dead people. She told me that. She said, if you want something, you can't have it. Somebody died. We're not benefiting by that. So I knew right away. I knew that a little girl was killed. And then I saw the shooting. Yes, she explained to me as much as I could understand. As much as I, in the age of, and the older I got, the more she explained to me. She mostly verified what I saw, because you know what? I'm a therapist. There is nothing worse that if you are looking at something and somebody says to you, no, this is not what you think it is. It's completely different. And you say, but I'm looking at it. And the other person who's older and wiser will say no. And then you begin to question yourself. Did I make a mistake? Do I not understand this? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? They had to verify it. Yes, she said, yes. This is where bodies are being burned. The smell is the smell of burning flesh. She told me that.
I think when I was kind of reading about your childhood, one of the things that I had to take a double take to make sure that I'd read this right. You say that, your diet at one point was 6 pounds of bread and 7 ounces of sugar per person per month. And at one point you say that you were so deprived of nutrients that you were licking the walls to try to extract calcium from the chalk in the paint.
What you have to get is what boggles my mind, that the killing millions is a very big job, and you have to do it well. I'm talking from the point of view, you know, from the German point of view, and you have to do it scientifically. How do you do it? There are not enough bullets. I mean, logically, it's a logical issue. So what they did, they starved us. How do they know how to starve us? They had professionals, dietitians, doctors with diplomas who knew how much to give us. They would, for instance, it would be something like, we have 2,000 people in this particular place. There is a transport coming. There's only room for 1,500. What are we going to do with the other 500? We don't have enough bullets, or we don't want to waste the bullets, even if we have them. You could drown them. Can you imagine? You could drown them. They would drown people. They would tie them. I'm not even sure I said it in the book, but it's people read the material. They would tie 2 or 3 people together with rocks and drown them, or you can starve them. So starvation, it depended how long they wanted you to stick around, of how much food they would give you. So in a ghetto, we got a little bit more. In Auschwitz, we had to die quickly. They didn't have enough space. Do you know what I mean? How organized this was? That's why they were successful.
Your mother said to you when you were on your way to Auschwitz, point at a gas chamber, this is where they take you if you're not perfect. The smoke you smell is human beings. And you're 5 years old by this point. I'd love to ask you, kind of, at an emotional level, for a 5-year-old to hear all this,
No.
what is going on for a 5-year-old?
That was a different 5-year-old. I have grandchildren, not 5 anymore, but you would never do that. It was a different mentality. When all you know is war and death, when you watch people being shot at the age of 3, when you walk outside and there are all these dead bodies, and I knew they died from hunger, you are not the same person. You're not a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. Your body may be 3 and 4, not your mind. So when we got off the train, I could smell it, and I smelled it from then on. It was permeated everywhere. It wasn't, you know, and when she said, be still, can you imagine, you have children? I don't know if you do or not. Okay.
Not that I know of anyway.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, take a 6-year-old nowadays, as they stand still. They will listen for 5 minutes. Who's going to listen? They don't have that mentality. They don't have to. They have their own inner freedom. I didn't have that. I had to obey. Because obeying means life. Disobeying means death. And I saw people who disobeyed. They were killed right in front of me.
I think perhaps one of the things that, again, you know, truly unbelievable, you know, you paint a very vivid, a very graphic, I guess, account of the scenery and also the smell. I mean, I wonder if you could kind of recount what that smell was like, because this, again, this is one of the small details, I think, that really kind of give you chills.
You know what? I can only use words. There is no way that I can describe it to you. I hate to say that I can't describe hunger to you. There's no way, because if you don't have lunch, you're hungry. That's not hunger. That's something very little, mild. It's like a little flea, you know, nothing. I can't describe it to you. It is, I don't know. Have you ever had your hair burned or something by accident? Like, you smell certain kind of, the burning of humans. It's got a particular smell, especially if it goes on and on and on and on and on.
Tova had trouble, I think, trying to describe hunger in the book, and that's where we tried to sort of come up with a way of describing what it was like, and we sort of came to the feeling that it was like having a monster inside you that's eating every part of the human being inside you. You're being devoured from within. And I think, Tova, you described once about having a terrible sort of cold inside you from the hunger. That is something that you can never forget that. But the monster's kind of eating. It's like this multi-headed Greek monster that's sort of eating at every piece of human flesh inside you. It's devouring you from within, and the pain must have been unbelievable. So one of the things that, sorry?
No, and the thought process, I didn't even know much about food, so I couldn't even picture it. But I know that's all I thought about. That's all of us thought about. That's why many people died, except people like me, that my mother was very tight, holding me, her rein. But when the liberation came, the first thing people did was eat. It was like an obsession. And the body couldn't take it, so many of them died from dysentery.
But your mother was so smart then, actually, wasn't she?
Right.
Because she stopped you from, following everybody else, and she gradually weaned you onto food, and that's why you're here today.
And that's what it means by obeying. If she said, "Don't eat a second piece," I would never dare. Because she was my lifesaver. She knew what to do, and I listened.
In the book, your mother sounded incredibly street smart, for a lack of a better term. Why was she like that? Because she seemed to be the reason, perhaps, that you are here today.
When you are fighting for yourself, you behave in one way. If you're fighting for your child, you behave completely differently. She wasn't fighting for herself. I suspect that if she didn't have me, she would have died. She would have succumbed to it. And a lot of research has been done on something like that, that if you had a reason to live, then you could survive better. If you had no reason, if you had no family waiting for you, if you've got no children, if you knew that if you survive, there'll be nobody left, I'm not sure you wanted to survive. Except most people hoped, that my mother also hoped, that her family somebody would survive. But the idea that she had to protect me was all her thought process, how to handle a child when she knew that children were the first victims. We were the first ones. And then came the elderly.
It clearly shows how, I guess, attuned to this she was, because at one point, I think as just a young child, you were getting attacked by a guard. And in that moment, when your mother was there, she overrided all of her maternal instincts, because she knew that if she got involved, you both would probably be killed. So I think that's a testament to, I guess, how... I know it too.
But I know it too. We both know it. I could have cried. I could have ran to her. Isn't it normal for a 5.5-year-old child, when somebody hits you, to run to your mom that's standing right there? But I knew the consequences, because I've been watching. You got to watch. You got to see. In a situation like that, every move could mean death. Every move. Every move. I remember thinking to myself, if I stand in the front, is that good? No, maybe I should go to the back. Maybe I should go to where we walked out for the counting. But I sort of followed my mother, and that day she stood in the front. Other days she stood in the back. So I stood next to her, and I wouldn't have been seen. It's so interesting. I don't know if you've read other books, but things like, if you stand here, then the Gestapo will have one feeling towards you and maybe save you. If you stand here, the same person, he may not like it or something and have you killed. Because you know why? It was an irrational nightmare. It wasn't a thought out. And also the thought that if not now, you'll be killed later. There was no question about it. So
What role would you say that fate, or I guess extreme luck or chance, played in you surviving all this?
I think it's luck. I think when you speak to anybody who survived Auschwitz, they will tell you it was luck. Because I always said to myself, I wasn't better than the other children. Or maybe I said it not to feel guilty. I wasn't richer. I wasn't smarter. It just that I arrived on a Sunday, which I only found out the last 10 years. I didn't know that. And the situation wasn't, that's what this guy who wrote the book, Michael, I forgot his last name. He said that they didn't want to open up to fire up another gas chamber or crematorium because we were going to die anyhow. It didn't matter today or next day. So the Germans, they were Christians, which I never understood either, by the way. I never did any study what kind of Christianity they followed. And they wouldn't work too much on Sunday. And then there are other, I think Malcolm wrote a few theories because we don't know why I wasn't killed. Because 99.9 kids were killed immediately. In fact, if you were 14, you were told by everybody who stood near you, even if it's not your parents, just say you're 16, say you're 16, stand straight and go a little bit on your tiptoes, because at 16 you could work. So you had to try to be 16. I've heard these stories over and over again of 12-year-old trying to look 16. So they shouldn't be killed. So it just.
And if I'm right in saying you also survived, one of the only survivors of a trip to the gas chamber.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. Well, I wasn't the only one. It was a whole barrack of people. You know, all the kids that were with me. I don't know what happened. I remember all the details. I even feel the cold. It was so cold. And I don't know. Again, Malcolm tried to do some research because that's his field of research like that. And he came up with some ideas. I don't know. I just don't know.
I mean, it may have been a coincidence, but around about the time, and we can't be sure of this, that Tova was there, the head of the Gestapo, basically the head of the whole sort of the death camp process, decided that there was going to be no more gassing, because the thing is, the Allies were making progress, and they didn't want there to be any more evidence of the sort of mass slaughter and genocide that they were carrying out. And so there came a day in the autumn of 1944 when there were no more gassings, and it's perfectly possible that that happened, and that the message came down on the day that Tova and her fellow children from that barrack were led to the gas chamber. But I mean, we will never know that if that was the day, because we haven't been able to work out precisely when it was that Tova went there. But that's one theory.
And it's pretty remarkable that you were actually inside this gas chamber as this.
Well, I wasn't in the gas chamber. I was in the anteroom. I was in the waiting room. If I were inside, I don't know what would happen unless they stopped gassing that day. I don't know. But I was in a waiting room. And I remember a child doesn't have any theory or intellectual thought process. We know we feel physically left, right. Like I remember walking down the steps a little bit, or tiny steps, and I remember the big room with all the numbers all around for the hooks, and I couldn't read the numbers. So I remember the physical thing, and I remember them shouting. You know what they were shouting about? And the cold, waiting. And I remember it was daytime when we went, came back at night. Because at night, I didn't see the women, I heard them. And again, my mother asked me, and I remember her voice. And I told her, again, the reason it's so detailed, because I'm low and short. So I see only the bottom, everything around. I don't see up. You know, it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because I thought of that. That I remember.
I just need to help Tova a little bit with the narrative there, because what happened was when Tova went to the gas chamber with those children, she went past the area of the camp where her mother was with all of these other people, and her mother shouted out to her saying, "Where are you going?" And Tova said, "We're going to the gas chamber." And then, you know, the women were astonished when they came back a few hours later.
Right. And I was sort of apologetic almost. I said, they couldn't do it this time. They'll do it next time. I felt the job wasn't done, whatever it was supposed to have been done. So
again, when I was reading the book, it was, you know, it's really hard for me, I guess, to fathom that this isn't just a terrible dream. Like, it's not some sort of terrible, sick work of fiction. Does it feel like that to you in some ways, like that this actually happened?
I want to tell you something. Going back to Auschwitz, I've been back a number of times, but I remember going back with my daughter. I think she had her children with her. I can't remember. Oh, no. That was before the children, because somebody made a movie. So, and it's very quiet there. Yeah. And my daughter takes out an apple, just an apple from her backpack. It was lunchtime, and she eats it. I get furious. And I say to her, "How can you eat when all these people are starving?" She looks around. She said, "What people?" And she started crying because I was very, very upset at her. And I realized that I wasn't here. I was somewhere else. I was back. And I was among the starving people. And there was an apple available. So I had to apologize. You know, I'm a little crazy, but it almost feels that it's impossible. Then I went another time, and I went to Block 11, which I did not know was that when I was there. I didn't know about Block 11. I knew that there was a place where there were people, but they showed me the place where they were kept, the people who were slated to die. I never forgot that, by the way. That's after as an adult. The space was about, let's say, 2 feet with walls. It was like a space, and they would put all the people who were going to just about to go to they were waiting to have space, and those people could hardly walk because they were so, and they would put like 30 people. That's why the woman who, we had a wonderful guide who was a professor. She wasn't just the guide, she was professor in a Polish university in the Holocaust. So she pointed out how many people were put together while they were waiting to be taken to the gas chambers. And all I could see is those people. It was in my mind for weeks afterwards, because I saw them walking around the Muslim manner, you know, they were like nothing. There was nothing there, just, you could see everything from the inside. And then they were they were gathered from the camp and put into that particular space while they were waiting.
Can I just help clarify that a little bit so that people might not understand what a Muslimana is? These were people who had basically given up on life. They were called Muslimana because they were like Muslims who were praying. They were thin, you know, beyond thin, and starved to death, and they could barely move. And so they were, you know, on the verge of death itself. That's what it means.
Right. But the picture in my mind, because I really could picture it, I say, that's where they put them. See, I heard about it, but I didn't see it. That's where they put those people. And for weeks afterwards, I was sorry that she took us there. So even me am shocked to this day.
So, you know, we've kind of talked about it, just 5 years old, you know, you've had your head shaven, you've been tattooed. I think perhaps one of the most remarkable stories in the book is kind of how your mother led you to an infirmary where you had to lay next to a corpse, which in fact allowed you to survive. I wonder if you could share this story with us.
You know what? Of all the stories, to me, this was the easiest. It was the easiest because I was never afraid of a corpse, ever. And the corpse was still warm. So I was, all this happened around January because it was the end of the war. That's when the Allies came. And Poland is freezing at that time of the year, freezing. So I hadn't seen my mother for months. Here I knew she was not far away. And she told me how to behave under the blanket, how to breathe into the floor, with my nose and my mouth. She turned my head in such a way. I didn't resist. I knew exactly what I was helping her and how not to move. And then she said to me, and the corpse was visible. And she said to me, I will be the only one who will uncover you. So don't uncover no matter what. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm pretty lucky. I had a blanket. My mother wasn't far away. And in some way I felt safe because she wasn't far away. So it gave me a feeling that I'll make it. I may really make it. Except when the guy came to check, the SS person. And that's when I held my breath. That was, one more minute and I would have to breathe, but I was fine. He passed by. He first checked if the corpse is really dead, and it was really dead. So
pretty remarkable, and just, I guess, really shows how small the margins were between death and life.
Absolutely. There were minutes between life and death. A second. Exactly right.
What was it like for you when the Allies turned up at that point?
When they came?
When they came, yeah. What was it like to, I guess, finally be free? What was that like?
I just wanted to eat. Freedom and all that. I just wanted food. But I remember how small I was because I was picked up by a soldier. And I looked at my mother and she didn't panic. So it was a good soldier. I thought he was like that because I was 6.5. And he threw me up and caught me again. And it was like a new experience. And then all I wanted was to eat. And nothing mattered. Nothing mattered. And they were very good about it because they started kitchens. And it's the first time I smelled fresh bread in my whole life, And they made some kind of soup, which I only ate later because my stomach wasn't good. And that's where my mother took me around and showed me all the dead people. Can you imagine after I saw the sight is even worse. People were sitting, leaning against barracks, and in front of them were like pots of soup from the Russians and their stomach was completely like open and everything was out. It was the most frightening. That was frightening to me. And she said, that's what will happen if you don't listen to me. Apparently hundreds and hundreds, I don't know how many, I didn't do research. Lots of people died after the war like that from overeating.
You say in the book, I lived with a constant fear that my parents would be butchered in front of my eyes or that they would disappear and never come back. From the moment I awoke, I was scared that it would be my turn to be killed next. I wonder, because obviously you're a therapist, as you mentioned, do you feel that it's possible to process something like this for what a young person goes through? Is that even possible to ever come to really terms with it?
It's very hard. A friend of mine called me yesterday that I have not spoken in 50 years. He didn't even know I was in Auschwitz. because we didn't talk about it. He was in Russia in a one of those
Gulags.
which one?
A gulag.
Right, Kulak's camps where he worked very hard. And he said to me, we were teenagers together. I knew you all through my teenage years. Why did you never told me? I said, because I didn't want to. Because I didn't want to be seen as that, and I didn't want you to be sorry for me. And it just wasn't the time in the 50s and 60s. Nobody wanted to hear. So it was very hard then, but I was very lucky in a way. After my mother's death and so forth, I met this fabulous therapist. And for 5 years, Dr. Kaplan, I was with her for 5 years. And she helped me in every possible way. And the truth is, I still go to a therapist once in a while because, you don't really recuperate. You learn to manage. You learn to put it aside when you have no time for it. And when you have time for it, it comes out. It really does.
I'd love to ask you, Malcolm, because, I was kind of going through your story, and I know, for instance, that you've covered genocide within Bosnia. And in the book, you kind of talk about that it's hard to comprehend kind of the absence of conscience, the casual manner in which so much of these murders were committed. Do you think that it's possible to see something of this scale ever again?
Well, I think you just have to look at what's happening in Ukraine to see to see the sort of brutal murders that are taking place. And there is I don't know whether it actually sort of constitutes genocide, but it's certainly brutal. And the rules of war are being broken. And I think the story that we've written is really a story for all times. And hopefully it'll be fresh for people so they can see that these sorts of things can happen. We didn't sort of go out to compare it to Russia's invasion because we were coming to the end of the book when Russia went into Ukraine. But I mean, you just have to look at what has happened over the past 30 years to see the numbers of occasions where there has been genocide since. And what Tova went through was the most extreme sort of form of humanity's wickedness to other human beings. But people are capable of doing those dreadful things. And what's interesting about the ghetto is that there were Poles, who lived out nearby who were actually sort of facilitating in a way. And one of my experiences of being in central Bosnia was that actually the brutality sometimes was much closer, where neighbors turned on neighbors. There was much more sort of hatred, and there was resentment that went into the attacks that, for example, the Serbs would perpetrate against the Muslims, or the Croats would perpetrate against the Muslims, and occasionally they might sort of fight back. But and look at Rwanda as well, which is perhaps the worst example, where you had over a million people murdered, just because they belonged to the wrong tribe. So as human beings, we are capable of the worst sorts of atrocities, and often towards the people that are closest to us. So hopefully the lesson of the book is that you just never let it get that far. And as Tova rightly says, the thing is that nobody took any notice. And so the worst thing to do is to ignore things. You just have to speak out, because otherwise things, will get out of control. I mean, it took 20 years for Adolf Hitler to write Mein Kampf, for Tova's family and people to end up in death camps. It could happen much more quickly these days. And there is no excuse for it to happen, because we all have social media, we're all aware of what's going on, and we cannot let hatred spread.
And what worries me is that I know in Europe, probably also here, anti-Semitism is increasing terribly, and it's very scary. I mean, why all of a sudden? I wish I knew the reason why right now. And the only thing that gives me comfort, of course, is Israel, because I was just there. I just came back last week. And it gives me the pride of seeing a very powerful nation. They're very powerful there. I mean, I couldn't believe it. In the last 3 years that I wasn't there, the country has rebuilt itself. I think they doubled the number of houses and roads. It's just gigantic right now. And I feel protected. I feel protected by Israel as a Jew. But it's very scary. And I wish people like you would talk to those hatred mongers. Why? What's going on?
Well, Toby, you yourself the other day, actually, when we were doing another conversation, you mentioned, what it was, and it was scapegoating. Is that people always look for scapegoats? That was the word that you used.
People that what? I'm sorry.
They scapegoat. They look for scapegoats.
Oh, yes, scapegoat. But why now? I mean, why do we need? Yes. Why do they need scapegoats right now? Why? It's something happened. What did we? I mean, Germany kept saying that we have their jobs, which is ridiculous, of course, and that they would be much better off. That's why the country followed him. Kill all the Jews. Kill all those you don't want to. The mentally ill, the gypsies, the Romans, the gypsies, but kill them all, and we'll have a great country. It's stupidity, but it's a reason. Even if it's a made-up reason. But why? I don't know of any reasons right now. Right now, what is it? Maybe you would know. I don't.
One of the questions I think that really came up that people would be really interested, I think, to find out is in the book. I know you talk about not survivor's guilt, but survivor's growth. Now, I would love to ask you kind of from everything kind of that you went through, and you detail it in incredible detail in this book, is how has all that experience that you went through kind of given way to your philosophy for how you lived your life after you kind of come out of those horrific experiences?
It's interesting because at first I would say I have no guilt because I don't feel it. I'm a therapist and I know how guilt feels. I don't feel it. But in a way, you could say I do because I have an obligation. And from the very beginning, I wanted to share it with people so they should know, and nobody wanted to hear me. The moment that the society was ready, I spoke about it. And the reason I speak about it is I don't want all those souls to be forgotten. You're not Jewish, are you?
No.
So I just want to give you a little Jewish ceremony, is that when we go to a Jewish grave, we put a little rock on a little stone on the monument. And so whoever passes by will know that somebody thinks about this person. Well, those people have no monuments. They are ashes, right? So my talking is like putting a reminder. Remember the 1.5 million children? Look how the world would have been different. All the musicians and the philosophers and the scientists and the artists and all gone. And the million of people. So I speak in a sense, it's almost I speak sometimes so often that I'm exhausted. Literally, physically and emotionally exhausted because I feel I should. I feel that I survive for a reason. I can't go on, business as usual. I can't do it. I can't think like that. So maybe that's how it also heals me. That's how I express that feeling of I'm here and they're not.
A hypothetical question that I found quite interesting that was sent into us. If you had the chance to speak to Hitler or an SS guard or Johann Kropfitch or anything like that, what would you say to them?
There is nothing to say. There is nothing to say. But I would like to speak to a German that is my age, who I'm more interested, how can a normal, Hitler was crazy. We know about that. We found out he had psychological issues. He was on medication. And at the end of his time, he had so much medication that his hands were shaking. He would meet his soldiers because his hands were shaking. He was crazy. You can't ask a crazy person. You can ask a normal person why they followed him. That's what I want to do. I want to address people in Germany, if they ever let me, of that age group. Like, let's say, well, I don't know if they're around anymore. I have to do it fast. Let's say people who are now 90, 95, they were very young though. How can they follow a person like that? What psychology would allow a normal person who's married with a family, and children, and has a job to say, yes, let's kill our neighbors so we can have what? Their paintings, their house. I can't imagine. Can you imagine somebody coming to you and saying, look, I have a neighbor's great next door, fabulous house. Must be, I haven't been inside, but it looks great. Somebody's going to give me and say, go, we'll get rid of that she's 95 years old lady. We can smother her and all that inside is yours. How does that work? What allows, that's what I want to know. What allowed the German people to do that? I don't know what I would say to Hitler, or I wish you had been a painter. We would have been much happier if you had gotten into the art school.
Yeah. By the time this podcast goes live, the book will be out. Where can these listeners, the people that watch our show, that read our blogs and stuff, where can they connect with you guys? What messages you want to share with them about the book, and anything you'd like to send our audience to?
Go ahead. What do you want to say? Anything that's...
Well, my website's out there, so is my address, and I'll answer people's questions very happily.
Yeah, I think I have a website.
You probably your son's probably organized it, so you probably...
My son did it. Yeah. But what we didn't do is to put the website in the book. I guess the timing was different. But we have a website, and I will answer any questions anytime.
Let's ask you a question, Joe. Let's ask you a question.
Please.
What is your main takeaway from the book?
That if you don't talk about these things, if you let them fester and you don't talk about the unimaginable horrors that went on, then people will forget about them, and you cannot let that happen. That was really one of the things that I think was communicated in this, and I hoped that was the message, because I mean, obviously for me, I'm 26. It's led to a great deal of awareness for me. So if that was your intention, then it certainly has.
Absolutely. I think the last chapter is called Remember Us. Those people who are not here, I hope there is a heaven or something, and they can look down and see that we try to remember them in some way.
Everything discussed today will be in a link below in our description, so our audience can just swipe up. We'll also put a link to your TikTok page. You're a bit of a TikTok.
Oh, the TikTok. Yeah, well, Mike, I just want to tell you something quickly. Yesterday, there was a ceremony here in New Jersey where my grandson got an
award,
statue or something, like a flame made out of something. I don't call these things. With his name on it, as a thank you of an upstanding high school student who has reached more people his age who knew nothing about the Holocaust. 50 million people, kids, mostly kids who are on TikTok, although it's becoming much more popular now. But when he started, there was hardly, maybe 6 months ago or less. So that's what it is. The young people have to carry on.
Your grandson's doing a great job as well. I mean, getting
Yeah.
up 500,000 followers at least is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
amazing. So, but what tells me is that people are interested. That's what tells me. And I get questions, so many questions, constantly.
Well, guys, I want to pay my tribute to both of you for coming on, for writing this amazing book, for sharing the experiences. Everything discussed will be linked below. This has been a real privilege for me, a real highlight in the 5 years we've run this show. So thank you both so much for coming on and taking
Thank
the
you
time.
very much for having
Thanks for
us.
having us.